Hello, survivors. Glad you made it back. Take a second to like and subscribe. It helps keep this voice reaching you. Now, let's begin the story. I always thought the Ash Belt was just a story, something people whispered about at night to keep children from wandering too far from the settlements. But the closer we drew to it, the more I understood it was real, terribly real, and it was waiting for us. The sky had already changed days before we reached it. Out west the clouds always had that bruised look, heavy with soot that never fell, hanging like a permanent reminder of the war that had burned the world decades ago. The air stung faintly on the tongue, a metallic tang that coated the teeth and never went away. Every morning when the sun rose, it wasn't golden. It was pale, filtered through a gray veil that never lifted. We stopped at the last ridge before the wasteland, our caravan scattered across the broken asphalt of what had once been a highway. The road curved down into a vast expanse of gray emptiness, ash dunes shifting slowly like dead seas, broken by the jagged skeletons of collapsed towers and twisted steel. It looked endless, like an ocean without waves, only silence. I climbed on top of the truck cab and scanned it with binoculars. Through the cracked lenses I saw no movement, no birds, no smoke, just the occasional gleam of glassified earth catching the dim sun. The land had been burned, then frozen, then burned again until nothing recognizable remained. It wasn't soil, it was residue, as if the planet itself had been cremated. Our caravan was small, 2 battered trucks held together by scavenged parts, 3 carts drawn by skeletal horses, and about 20 souls walking beside them. There were ex-soldiers with rusted rifles, families clutching whatever they could carry, scavengers with sharp eyes and sharper knives. None of us trusted each other fully, but all of us knew the same truth. There was no going around the belt. If we wanted to reach the eastern settlements with our cargo, we had to cross it. The cargo was the only reason any of us were here, packed into lead-lined crates in the back of the lead truck. Inside were medicines, vials of antibiotics and antivirals salvaged from an old research vault in the mountains. The enclave beyond the belt needed them desperately. Outbreaks spread fast in the east, and without help they'd fall into chaos. Someone had to get these supplies across, and that someone turned out to be us. I didn't volunteer, I was chosen. The enclave leaders called me steady, said I had a way of keeping people together, but the truth was simpler. I had no family left to lose, no one waiting for me on either side of the belt. So if I didn't make it, the world wouldn't be robbed of anyone but me. At the ridge, we rested and prepared. Masks were checked and rechecked. The filters wouldn't last forever, but they'd buy us time. Protective suits were patched with tape where tears had formed. Some had no suits at all, only layers of rags wrapped tight around their skin. The ash would find them first. It always found the weakest first. The soldiers, if they could still be called that, walked the perimeter. Their rifles were oiled, though the ammo was scarce. The war had ended decades ago, but old weapons were everywhere, traded like relics. We didn't fear armies anymore. We feared hunger, disease, and the quiet death that came with breathing too much of the wrong air. When night fell, we camped at the edge. Fires kept small so the smoke wouldn't draw eyes from unknown watchers. The story said raiders lived in the belt. Ghost men who no longer cared about survival, only cruelty. Others said they weren't men at all anymore, but something changed by the radiation, burned and twisted but still walking. No one knew if the stories were true, but everyone believed them, because fear was easier than hope. I lay awake in my bedroll, the ash plains stretching out in front of me under the moonlight. The dunes shifted with the wind, long waves rolling like the sea, and for a moment I imagined it breathing, like a living thing waiting for us to step inside its lungs. That night, one of the families turned back, a mother and father, clutching a little boy no older than 6. They said they couldn't do it. They'd rather take their chances starving in the western hills than risk the belt. No one stopped them. No one could promise survival. We watched their silhouettes vanish into the darkness, and I wondered if they would ever see morning again. By dawn, the rest of us were ready. The air had that stillness, the kind before storms. Our convoy rolled forward, wheels crunching over fractured asphalt, and the ash rose in faint clouds around our feet. The first step into the belt was quieter than I expected. No screams, no fire, just silence swallowing us whole. The ground shifted underfoot, softer than soil, brittle in places. Sometimes the ash was only a skin stretched over collapsed ruins, and stepping wrong could drop a man into a pit of broken steel and glass. We moved carefully, slowly, no one speaking louder than a whisper. Even sound felt dangerous here, as if noise itself might stir something from the ruins. Hours passed like days. The sun climbed overhead, filtered through gray haze. Sweat pooled beneath our masks, stinging eyes, soaking clothes. Breathing felt like pulling air through a cloth soaked in rust. Every step was a reminder. This place did not want us here. At midday, we stopped near the remains of an overpass. The concrete pillars collapsed, the road above broken into jagged teeth. We ate in silence, stale bread and dried roots. No one said it out loud, but the truth hung in the air. This was just the beginning. The belt stretched for weeks ahead, and already it was working its way into our bodies, into our minds. As I chewed the bread, dry as dust, I stared at the ruins and thought of the people who once drove this highway. Families in cars, late for work, children fighting in back seats. They were all gone, burned into the ash, leaving only this emptiness. And here we were, walking straight into it. The first day inside the belt was a trial. The second was worse. By morning the ash had worked its way into everything. Clothing seams, boots, even the threads of our blankets. It clung to sweat and oil until we all looked the same shade of gray, faces streaked like statues left out in storms. We packed in silence. Everyone had their own rhythm now. Check masks, seal filters, secure the straps, tighten bandages around wrists and necks where ash liked to slip inside. The trucks coughed reluctantly to life, their engines protesting the dust that choked every vent and filter. The horses shivered beneath their makeshift coverings, eyes rolling as if they knew what kind of ground they were forced to cross. When the caravan began to move again, I walked near the front beside the lead truck. The road was long gone now, swallowed under dunes of pale grit. Every so often you could see a faint outline of paint or a cracked line of asphalt, but mostly we followed the sun east, trusting compasses and memory more than maps. The belt shifted too often for maps to matter. What looked like a ridge one year might collapse into a hollow the next. The land was restless, always reshaping itself. The first collapse happened before noon. One of the carts strayed off the packed trail, its wheel sinking into what looked like solid ground. The horse screamed as both it and the cart plunged into a pit. Ash poured around them like liquid, dragging wood and metal down into blackness. Men rushed forward, hauling ropes, digging with their hands, but the horse was gone before anyone reached it. Swallowed without even a final sound, the cart went too, along with a crate of supplies. The silence afterward was worse than the collapse. Everyone stared at the hole, a ragged wound in the ash where a heartbeat ago there had been a living animal. The dunes gave nothing back, no trace of struggle, only stillness, as if the land had taken what it wanted and sealed itself again. That was when the first argument started. Two of the scavengers accused the driver of carelessness, voices raised behind their masks. The soldiers moved in, rifles angled low but visible. They didn't need to say anything. The weight of the guns ended the fight before it started. Still, the mistrust lingered. In the belt, anger came quick, resources too thin, nerves too raw. We kept moving, slower now, each step more cautious. The ash dragged at boots, filling every crease, grinding like sandpaper until skin blistered beneath. The wind carried fine particles that glittered in the weak sunlight, beautiful in a way, like snow drifting in a broken world. But beauty in the belt was dangerous. It only reminded you how easy it was to be fooled. That afternoon, I caught the first sight of movement. At first I thought it was the heat playing tricks, a shimmer across the dunes. But through the binoculars I saw them. Dark figures on the horizon, maybe 5 or 6. Too far to tell if they were men or something else. They didn't move toward us, just stood watching, silhouettes against the haze. I didn't tell the others at first. I wasn't sure if my eyes were lying. But by evening the shapes were gone, and I couldn't shake the unease. The stories of raiders, feral wanderers born in the ash, didn't feel like stories anymore. Maybe they followed us from the ridge. Maybe they had always lived here, waiting for travelers foolish enough to cross. That night we camped beneath the skeleton of an old transmission tower. The metal still reached into the sky, twisted and blackened, its top snapped off and lying half buried nearby. We used its frame as shelter against the wind. Fires lit low again. No one wanted to make themselves visible in the belt. I walked the perimeter as the others settled. The ash crunched softly underfoot, every step muffled by the dead landscape. The horizon glowed faintly with the memory of sunset, but darkness fell fast here. When night came, it came absolute, as if the world had forgotten light. During my watch, I heard something out there, not the wind, not the shifting of dunes, but a faint scrape, deliberate, rhythmic, like stone against metal. When I turned, the sound stopped. Binoculars showed only blackness. The ash moved like waves under moonlight, but nothing stood apart. Still, I felt the prickle between my shoulders, the sense that we were no longer alone. By morning, we lost another horse, this time not to the ash, but to sickness. Its breathing had grown labored in the night, lungs rasping with every exhale, until it simply lay down and didn't rise again. The family that owned it wept quietly, but no one could spare time for grief. The carcass was stripped of what could be used: leather, straps, bone tools. The rest was left for the belt to swallow. That was how we lived out here. Loss was not something to mourn. It was something to cut apart and repurpose. The soldiers grew harsher as we pressed deeper. Their leader, a broad man with a scar cutting down his jaw, kept reminding us why we were here. He tapped the crates of medicine in the truck like they were holy things, repeating that people on the other side needed them, that we couldn't falter because the East was counting on us. His voice was gravel, his conviction iron, but I saw the fear in his eyes when he thought no one watched. By midday, the horizon showed ruins, the jagged tips of buildings poking through ash, leaning and broken like teeth. We adjusted our course toward them, hoping the rubble would provide cover for a camp. The sun was low by the time we reached the outskirts, ash swirling through the empty windows like smoke. Every doorway looked like a mouth ready to swallow us. As we made camp inside what had once been a gas station, I found myself staring at a faded sign still clinging to the wall. The letters peeled but just visible. Last stop before the state line. It felt like a cruel joke. The last stop had become the first grave, buried beneath a world that no longer existed. That night, when I lay awake listening to the creaks of the ruined walls, I thought again of the shadows on the horizon. If they were raiders, they knew where we were now. If they weren't, then I wasn't sure which truth was worse. And the belt stretched endlessly ahead, waiting. Morning brought a pale, brittle light through the ruins. The ash drifted in thin veils across the streets, soft enough to look harmless, heavy enough to choke lungs if you lingered too long without a mask. The caravan rose slowly, people moving like ghosts, shoulders hunched, voices muffled by filters. The air tasted metallic even through the mask, like coins pressed to the tongue. I stood watch as the soldiers organized the trucks. The horses that remained were restless, stamping at the ground, nostrils flaring against the dust. Animals knew better than men when danger was near, and danger had been near since the shadows. The ruins looked deserted, no footprints but our own, no sound but the hiss of ash against broken glass. But the feeling lingered, like eyes buried in the dark corners of windows, like something patient enough to wait for us to move. When we set out again, the ruins fell behind us in silence, but halfway across the flat stretch beyond, I turned. On the far ridge, black against the sun, they stood again. Figures, 5 at least, maybe more. No detail, just shapes. They didn't move, not even to shift weight or gesture. They only watched. I told the leader. Scarjaw we called him, though never to his face. He lifted his binoculars, studied them for a long time, then lowered the glass without a word. His jaw clenched, but he ordered no change in direction, no alarm raised. The caravan just kept moving east. That was worse than panic, the silence around the sighting. It told everyone the soldiers didn't know who or what those figures were either, and not knowing was worse than any certainty. By midday we reached what looked like a collapsed overpass, a tangle of rusted steel and concrete rising like bones from the dunes. It forced us to detour north along the ridge. The trucks strained over loose ground, wheels spinning, engines coughing. We had to unload supplies, carry them by hand up the slope while the vehicles crept. That was when the watchers grew bolder. From the ridge to the west, more figures appeared. Not 5 this time, but closer to 20. They didn't approach, didn't call out, just lined the crest of the dune, standing shoulder to shoulder like broken statues. Their stillness unsettled me most. No shifting, no fatigue, no visible breath in the cold air. Whispers rippled through the caravan. Some thought they were raiders, waiting for us to tire before striking. Others muttered stories of Beltborn, people twisted by years in the fallout, no longer wholly human. Superstition clung tight here. The belt had bred legends as much as it had corpses. Scarjaw finally snapped. He ordered rifles ready, barrels aimed at the ridge. But the figures didn't flinch. No retreat, no advance. They let us point weapons at them like it meant nothing. And in a way it didn't. No one wanted to waste bullets across half a mile of shifting ash. We pushed on until the ridge hid them from view. But even then, every head kept turning, scanning the horizon for their return. That night, we lit no fires. The ruins around us were too exposed. We huddled in silence, eating cold rations, the wind whispering through shattered walls. Somewhere in the distance came a sound, low, rhythmic, like drumming on hollow stone. It rose and fell with the wind until it seemed to seep into the ground itself. No one spoke of it, but no one slept deeply either. During my watch, I thought I saw movement again, shadows slipping between dunes. Never clear, always gone the moment I raised the binoculars. It left me doubting my own eyes, doubting whether the belt itself was playing tricks. But the prickle of unease down my spine stayed with me, the sense that distance was shrinking. The next morning confirmed it. When we set out again, tracks marked the ash. Not animal, not natural shifts of the wind, but deliberate prints, bare feet, wide splayed toes, deep impressions where weight had lingered. They circled our camp, weaving in and out like predators testing a herd. One of the scavengers cursed under his breath, swore they were marked, that the belt had already chosen them. Scarjaw silenced him with a blow from the butt of his rifle. But the damage was done. Fear spreads faster than ash, and once it takes root it doesn't let go. The caravan's pace quickened, trucks revving harder, horses urged forward until their sides frothed with sweat. We were moving not just toward the east, but away from something, away from those who stalked the edges of vision. By afternoon the ash thickened into a storm. Wind rose sharp enough to cut, stinging eyes and skin through any exposed seam. The sky turned a flat, furious gray, horizon erased. We could see nothing beyond the nearest truck. The caravan tightened instinctively, a huddle against the storm, sound swallowed by the roar. And then voices. I swear I heard them through the gale, not carried from our group, not the muffled shouts of soldiers, but voices layered in the storm, low, rasping, not quite human. They wove through the wind like threads, sometimes words, sometimes just sounds, laughter maybe, or something like it. I stumbled, gripping the side of a truck, heart hammering. When I looked at the others, I saw the same recognition in their eyes. We had all heard it. None of us wanted to admit it. The storm lasted until dusk. When it cleared, the caravan stood shaken and gray, every face hollow-eyed. But worse was what the ash revealed. On the ridge east of US, lined in perfect formation, stood the shadows, not 20 this time, but closer to 50, a wall of silent watchers. They did not move as the storm ended, did not shift as the light dimmed. They stood as if carved from the belt itself. No one spoke, no one dared. Even Scarjaw lowered his rifle without an order given. That night, as I lay beneath the cracked roof of a collapsed warehouse, I tried to convince myself of something human behind those figures. Raiders may be waiting for us to weaken, but deep down I knew the truth. These were no raiders. They were older than raiders, older than this caravan, older even than the war that had poisoned this land. They belonged to the belt, and now they belonged to us too. The wind announced itself at dawn, low at first, like a sigh rising from the ground, then sharper, pulling at canvas, rattling the broken glass and skeletal buildings. By the time the first gray light reached the horizon, the sky was already boiling with movement, a vast sheet of ash and dust roiling like a second ocean above our heads. The soldiers hurried us forward, but their voices were muffled, swallowed by the rising wind. Scarjaw kept waving his hand in sharp gestures, urging speed. He knew what was coming. Everyone did. The belt had moods, and this was its most merciless one. We wrapped scarves tighter, checked filters, sealed goggles, but nothing truly held the ash out. It clung, seeped, filled every seam until breathing felt like drawing knives into the lungs. The air turned gray, then darker, until the world was no more than a few paces wide. The trucks crawled, engines straining, headlights dull blurs swallowed whole by the storm. The sound was unbearable, not just the roar of the wind, but the hiss of particles against every surface, the scrape of ash clawing at glass and metal. It filled the ears like static, loud enough to drown thought, and yet, beneath it, something else lingered. Whispers. At first I thought they were tricks of the storm, shapes the mind carved out of chaos. But then I caught rhythm, syllables half-formed, some in English, others in tongues I didn't recognize, voices layered, calling, chanting, mocking. The more I tried to block them, the clearer they became. I looked to the others, their heads jerked, eyes wide behind goggles. They heard it too. One woman clutched her ears, stumbled to her knees, shaking her head violently. A soldier yanked her up by the collar, pushed her back into the march, but I saw his hands tremble. Through the haze, shadows appeared. At first I thought they were trucks or horses ahead, vague shapes blurred by ash, but they moved wrong, drifting sideways, vanishing, reappearing closer than they should. One loomed at the edge of vision, tall and still, only to melt back into gray when I tried to focus. The storm closed tighter. We lost the caravan's tail within minutes. The line frayed, clumps of people shuffling blind, tethered more by faith than sight. A truck ahead groaned, wheels sinking into soft ash. Men swarmed to push, their bodies nearly bent double against the gale. Another truck veered off, swallowed whole by the storm before anyone could call it back. I forced myself to keep eyes forward, to fix on the faint glow of the lead truck's lights. But even there I caught glimpses, shadows crossing the beams, not human, not shaped like anything that belonged. Figures bent wrong at the spine, some crawling low, some stretched tall and thin, flickering like film reels skipping frames. A hand grabbed my arm. One of the scavengers, eyes wild, his mask cracked at the corner. He shouted something, voice torn away by the storm. Before I could answer, he bolted sideways, sprinting into the ash. Gone in seconds, Scarjaw cursed, raised his rifle as if to fire, then let it drop. No bullet could follow him into that gray abyss. We pressed on, hours blurred into one another, the sun erased, time measured only by exhaustion. People staggered, collapsed, hauled up again by soldiers. Every step was a battle against the wind's pull. The belt did not want us here, and it made that clear with every breath. At some point, the whispers shifted. They grew louder, closer, pressing directly against the ear as if spoken from inches away. Some called my name. I swore it. My name whispered in a voice I had not heard in years. My brother's voice, dead long before the bombs. For a moment my legs faltered, my body screaming to turn toward it. And then the rational part of me roared back. He was gone, long gone. What spoke to me now was not him, but something that fed on memory, on grief. When the storm finally began to thin, we looked less like travelers than revenants. Every surface caked in gray, faces hollow behind masks, movements sluggish. The trucks rolled forward like beasts in their last moments. The horses' eyes showed white, wide with panic, breath shallow. We emerged into a valley of broken towers. Once a city perhaps, now reduced to jagged skeletons stabbing up from dunes. The ash storm broke itself against these ruins, leaving the center clearer. It felt like stepping into the eye of something vast and alive. The caravan reassembled slowly. Numbers counted, supplies checked. 2 trucks gone, 8 people missing. Vanished in the storm, claimed by it, or perhaps by the shadows that stalked within. Scarjaw barked orders, face set in stone, but his eyes betrayed him. He had seen them too. That night, as we camped in the lee of a collapsed tower, no one lit fires. No one dared. The silence between us was not rest, but fear held taut. The whispers had followed us out of the storm. When the wind died, the voices did not. They lingered faint at the edge of hearing, just beyond the crackle of radios, just beneath the rustle of ash sliding down ruined walls. And on the horizon, where the valley opened eastward, I saw them again. The shadows lined across the ridge, waiting, unmoved by storm, untouched by distance, closer now, always closer. I lay awake long after the others had drifted into uneasy half-sleep. The whispers never stopped, and I knew the storm had not driven the shadows off, it had carried them with us. The tower rose from the ash like the ribs of some long-dead beast, jagged concrete and twisted steel clawing upward. Its upper half had sheared away decades ago, leaving the stump leaning like it might topple with the next hard wind. But compared to the exposed valley, it was shelter, and so Scarjaw ordered us inside. We approached cautiously, boots sinking in drifts of fine dust, the ground crunching with glass that had once been windows. The entrance was half-buried, a black mouth yawning beneath slabs of fallen stone. 2 soldiers cleared the rubble enough to crawl through, then waved the rest of us forward. Inside the air was different, thicker, stale, but warmer, almost damp. The storm's roar dulled to a muffled moan outside, like the ocean heard from beneath water. It felt almost safe, and for a fleeting second I allowed myself to believe it. But the smell betrayed the lie. It was not just dust and mold. It was something sweeter, cloying, like fruit left too long in the heat. Bodies. We found them in the lower levels, huddled in corners, curled under makeshift bedding. Some long decayed, little more than brittle husks draped in cloth. Others fresher, though months at least had passed. The ash had preserved them in part, turning skin to parchment, eyes to empty hollows staring from beneath goggles. The soldiers dragged the corpses into a pile near the entrance, muttering under their breath, superstition, or maybe ritual. Scarjaw said nothing, only watched, his jaw clenched tight. We climbed higher into the tower, step by step, until we reached a level with wide gaps in the walls where glass once had been. Here we made camp. Trucks parked beneath the tower's shadow, horses tethered, survivors slumping in exhaustion against the walls. For a time, silence ruled, but as night drew in, it broke. The first sound was faint, like the scrape of stone on stone. It came from above, high in the hollow spine of the tower. One man looked up, swore he saw something moving along the beams. The soldiers dismissed him, saying rats, saying wind. But I knew better. Rats did not survive in the belt, and the wind did not sound like that. Later, when we gathered in small groups to eat stale bread and rationed water, the whispers returned. Not carried on storm this time, but rising from the tower itself, as though the concrete remembered every voice that had ever echoed through it. They spoke in fragments, pleas for water, shouts for help, prayers whispered in the dark. But sometimes, too often, they spoke in tones too familiar, voices of our dead, my mother's laugh, my brother's cry. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the cup. Others heard the same. The scavenger with the scar on her cheek fell to her knees, sobbing into her palms. She said her husband was calling her name from above the stairwell. No one went to look, not even the soldiers. That was when Scarjaw ordered watches, pairs posted at the stairwell, others at the wall gaps. He claimed it was to keep us safe from anyone who might be tracking us, but I saw the way his eyes flicked toward the black mouth of the stairs. He knew what haunted us here. He just refused to name it. Sleep came poorly. The air in the tower carried dreams thick as smoke, visions of fire and glass melting, of oceans boiling, of cities collapsing into themselves. And through it all, the shadows waited, always at the edge, always nearer when I woke. Near midnight, the first scream broke the fragile peace. A soldier at the stairwell cried out, rifle clattering to the floor. By the time others rushed over, he was gone. The only trace was his mask, lying cracked on the step. Scarjaw cursed, ordered lights up, rifles ready. We scoured the level, sweeping the walls, the hollow beams, the broken offices, but found nothing. The soldier had simply vanished, as though the tower had swallowed him whole. We regrouped, nerves frayed raw. No one spoke above a whisper now, and even then words were scarce. The scavenger woman who had wept earlier sat rocking back and forth, muttering to someone only she could see. When I placed a hand on her shoulder, she jerked away violently, hissing that I wasn't him, that he was still upstairs waiting. The hours dragged, every sound magnified, every flicker of shadow a threat. At one point, I thought I saw movement in the broken window opposite me. Not outside, but within the glass itself, though the panes were long gone. A reflection without a source, staring back, smiling faintly. Dawn never came, not here, not in the belt. The ash sky kept its perpetual twilight. But eventually Scarjaw called the order to move. Whatever shelter the tower had offered, it cost us too much. The missing soldier, the whispers, the weight pressing on us all. We could not stay. We gathered supplies with hurried hands, avoiding the pile of corpses at the base as though they might rise. The horses balked at leaving, eyes rolling, but the soldiers forced them forward. The trucks sputtered, engines clogged with ash, but rumbled reluctantly to life. As we rolled away from the tower, I looked back. The storm had settled enough that the broken ruin was clear in silhouette, rising crooked against the endless gray. And at its top, among the shattered beams, I swore I saw movement, figures leaning out to watch us go. Their forms were blurred, too far to be sure, but I knew. The tower had not been empty. It never had. We left the broken tower behind us, though it clung to my thoughts like grit in a wound. The air outside seemed even heavier after what we had endured inside, but Scarjaw pressed us forward, his pace unrelenting. The storm had eased into a thin haze, though the wind still dragged curtains of ash across the road. Each gust stung the eyes, coated our throats with dust, and made every word taste like metal. The road itself was a ruin, blacktop split and warped from fire long past. Our boots struck hollow against it, our horses stumbled on cracks, and the trucks groaned like sick beasts as they crawled along. We followed it east, deeper into the belt, though the horizon remained the same bleak wall of shifting gray. It was midday, or what passed for it under the ash sky, when we first saw the shapes. Dark lumps along the road ahead, low and motionless, half buried in dust. At first I thought it was just more wreckage, the bones of buildings swept from somewhere else. But as we neared, the lumps grew sharper, more familiar. The outline of wheels, axles, and cabins burned hollow. A convoy. The first truck we reached had been gutted by fire. Its frame rusted to orange skeleton. Its cab melted into grotesque shapes. Inside were bodies, slumped over steering wheels, curled in the corners where they had tried to escape. Their masks hung from cracked faces, filters clogged long ago. We spread out carefully, rifles ready. It was clear this group had met its end violently, though how and when was uncertain. Some corpses bore wounds, bullet holes in helmets, shattered bones, but most looked as though they had simply sat down and waited for death. The second vehicle was no better, an armored carrier, its back door half open. Inside, shadows leaned against the walls. When a soldier pulled them into the light, we saw the truth. They had suffocated, their filters clogged, their tanks empty. Claw marks raked the metal as they fought to get out, but none had made it. The scavenger woman muttered a prayer, covering her face. Another man retched into the ash. Scarjaw simply studied the wreckage, jaw tightening with each step. His silence was worse than words. The last of the vehicles told the darkest story. It was a bus, retrofitted for transport, its windows blackened, its roof lined with makeshift armor. Children's toys still rattled in the seats, dolls and carved wood, all coated in gray. The bodies inside were small, wrapped in coats too big for them. They lay huddled together, some clutching the adults who had failed to shield them. I could not look for long. I turned away, heart hammering, breath tight in my chest. The belt had claimed them without mercy, and for what? To vanish here, nameless, unremembered, their bones becoming one with the ash. Scarjaw gave orders then. The soldiers searched the wrecks for salvage, stripping anything still useful. Cans of food, though long spoiled, spare filters, most cracked but a few intact. Water flasks with only drops left. Even a rifle, its barrel warped but still serviceable. We took what little remained, though it felt like theft from graves. The others kept their eyes low as we loaded supplies into our packs. Only Scarjaw seemed untouched, though I noticed how he lingered longest at the bus, staring at the small forms before finally turning away. But the dead were not done with us. Tracks surrounded the convoy, half hidden in the ash. Some were boot prints, leading into the haze and vanishing. Others were strange, smeared, like something dragged or crawled through. Too many to count, too fresh to dismiss. One of the soldiers knelt, tracing the outline with a gloved hand. His face paled beneath his mask. He said the tracks were no older than a week, perhaps less. Scarjaw cursed, barked the order to move. We packed quickly, nerves raw, and marched on, leaving the convoy behind. But the silence of the road had shifted. The ash no longer just whispered in the wind. It carried weight, like eyes pressing on our backs. Hours passed, the haze thickened, blurring shapes ahead into shadows. Every drift of ash looked like a figure rising. Every gust of wind sounded like breath at our ears. The soldiers tightened formation, rifles lifted, scanning the horizon in restless arcs. Then we saw them. At first it was just a shape on the roadside, slumped beside the cracked asphalt. Another corpse, we thought, but as we neared, the figure stirred. Its head lifted weakly, mask cracked, eyes glinting red with burst vessels. It tried to raise a hand, lips moving soundlessly. Before any of us could reach him, the man collapsed, sinking back into the ash. His chest rose once, then stilled. The soldiers moved to check, but Scarjaw stopped them with a sharp gesture. He said nothing, but his meaning was clear. We could not risk contamination, not here, not now. The man's death was his alone. We marched faster. The image burned into us all. One survivor left behind, too broken to move, watching the road for salvation that never came. As the day stretched thin, the convoy's memory lingered with us. Every creak of the trucks, every groan of leather straps, every cough beneath a mask carried echoes of their failure. The line between us and them seemed thinner than ever. One failed filter, one broken wheel, one wrong turn, and we would join them, another forgotten convoy swallowed by the belt. When night came, we made camp in the shadow of a collapsed overpass. The soldiers formed a perimeter, horses tethered beneath the broken beams, trucks parked as a barricade. No fires, no lights, only silence, broken by the restless shifting of ash. I could not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the bus, the toys, the children curled against their parents, their faces blurred into the faces of those beside me now, faces that could just as easily join them. Somewhere in the distance, through the haze, a sound drifted, faint, metallic, almost like a bell, or perhaps a scream, carried thin across the belt. No one else stirred. Either they did not hear it, or they pretended not to. I stayed awake, staring into the ash, waiting for dawn, if dawn ever truly came in this place. We broke camp before the gray sky had shifted at all, though whether it was night or dawn hardly mattered anymore. The belt had a way of stealing time, making every hour bleed into the next. Our boots dragged through ash as though it wanted to keep us here, to bury us with the others who had fallen. By mid-March, the road widened and dropped into a basin. The haze parted just enough for us to see what lay below. A vast depression, like a wound in the earth, black and glinting. At first it looked like water, a mirage born of heat and exhaustion. But as we drew nearer, I realized what it truly was. A lake of glass. The crater spread for miles, smooth and rippling like frozen waves. Fused sand and soil hardened by fire so hot it had burned the very bones of the world. Its surface caught the dim light in dull reflections, fractured into shards of green, gray, and sickly yellow. The air above it shimmered faintly, a heat haze that never lifted, though the fire that had made it had burned out decades ago. We stood at its edge in silence, all sound swallowed by the stillness. Even the ash dared not cross here. The wind slid over the crater and passed on, leaving the center untouched, as though the scar had claimed its own gravity. Scarjaw gave the order to skirt the edge, to keep moving until we found a path across. The crater stretched so far it would take days to circle, and we had neither the time nor the supplies. So we walked along the rim, boots crunching on brittle slag, each step watched by the unblinking glass below. As we moved, I thought of what this place must have been on that first day. A city, perhaps, or a village. People waking, working, living their small lives beneath the illusion of safety. Then the light, brighter than the sun. Then the heat, the wind, the fire. Everything gone in seconds. Only this frozen sea left behind. One of the scavengers muttered that the ground was cursed, that spirits of the dead lived beneath the glass, watching us with blind eyes. No one answered him, but I saw how the soldiers gripped their rifles tighter. Even Scarjaw's steps slowed, just enough for me to notice. Half a day passed before we reached the place where the convoy before us had tried to cross. A road of melted black ran down the slope into the crater, fused solid but cracked in jagged seams. The trucks hesitated at the rim, engines growling low as if they too feared the crossing. Scarjaw inspected the path, kicking loose shards that skittered across the surface like brittle bones. He ordered us forward, single file, no stragglers. The first truck rolled onto the glass, wheels crunching with every turn, echoing like drums across the hollow basin. The rest of us followed, boots slipping on the smooth surface, each step threatening to give way. The silence here was suffocating. No wind, no ash, only the sound of our own movements. Every breath rasped loud inside the mask, every cough a thunderclap in the stillness. Halfway across, I looked down and saw shapes beneath the surface. At first I thought they were tricks of light, fractures in the glass. But the longer I stared, the clearer they became. Outlines of buildings, streets, cars, and bodies, frozen mid-motion, as if the city had been pressed flat into the earth. Children running with arms stretched wide, faces melted to blank ovals. Soldiers lifting rifles that had turned to lumps of slag. The dead of this place preserved forever beneath our feet. I stumbled, heart hammering, eyes locked on a figure directly beneath me. A woman clutching something close to her chest, frozen in an embrace that had lasted decades. Only then did I realize it was a child. The soldier behind me shoved me forward, his voice sharp, reminding me not to stop. But I could not shake the sight, nor the feeling that the woman's empty sockets had turned toward me, watching, accusing, pleading. When the first crack came, it sounded like thunder. The ground split beneath the lead truck, a jagged fissure racing out across the glass. The vehicle lurched, one wheel sinking into the fracture. The driver gunned the engine, wheels screaming, the smell of burning rubber rising. Scarjaw barked orders. Push forward, keep moving. The soldiers ran to the truck, shoving, hauling ropes, dragging it free before the fissure widened. The sound echoed and echoed, rolling across the basin like the memory of explosions long past. We pushed harder after that, fear of being swallowed driving us faster than hunger or exhaustion. By the time we reached the far rim, every boot step felt like a hammer on thin ice, every breath a prayer that the glass would hold. At last we clambered up the opposite slope, legs trembling, lungs heaving in the stale air. When we reached solid ground, the soldiers collapsed to their knees, some muttering thanks, others simply staring back at what we had crossed. The scavenger woman whispered that we had walked on graves, and that the dead beneath the glass would not forgive us. Her words gnawed at me, for I felt it too. The silence behind us seemed deeper now, as if the crater itself was listening. Scarjaw gave no sign of doubt, but I saw the sweat streaking his face beneath the mask, the way his hand lingered near the grip of his rifle, as though expecting something to crawl up from the glass. We marched on, away from the lake, though I carried it with me still, every reflection, every fractured shard etched in my mind. The belt was full of scars, but this one was different. This was not just death, not just decay. This was memory made solid, a reminder of what mankind had burned into itself. That night we camped in the lee of a shattered ridge, far enough from the crater to hide its shine. Still, I could not sleep. When I closed my eyes, I saw the woman and child again, locked in their final embrace. Their glassy forms whispered in my mind, asking why we still walked, why we still dared to live in a world that had turned itself into stone. I had no answer, only silence. We woke to the sound of drops. At first I thought it was ash falling heavier than usual, but then I saw the dark stains spreading across the canvas above my head. Slow beads working their way through the seams, fat and oily. The air inside the tent already smelled different, sharp and bitter like burnt rubber. The cry went up quickly, rain, masks on, cover everything. By the time I stepped outside, the world was already drowning. Thick drops pattered against the earth, black as tar. They hissed when they hit the ground, seeping into cracks and smoking faintly where they pooled. The ash that had settled over centuries turned to sludge, clinging to boots like wet cement. The soldiers were shouting orders, dragging tarps over the trucks, pulling civilians under what little shelter we had. Scarjaw stood in the open without fear, rain sliding off the layers of his coat, mask lenses blackened with streaks. He pointed to the ridge above and barked that we had to move higher, away from the low ground where the runoff would choke us. We marched up the slope, every step heavier than the last. The rain slicked everything, turning stone to slime, and more than one scavenger fell and slid back into the sludge below. Soldiers pulled them up with ropes, cursing as their gloves smoked from the contact. The water was poison, they said, not just foul but alive, as if it burned its way into the skin. From the ridge we could see the storm stretch for miles. The belt vanished beneath curtains of black, the horizon erased by sheets of falling sludge. No thunder, no lightning, just the endless hiss of the rain as it devoured everything it touched. We huddled beneath broken concrete slabs and warped steel beams, remnants of some structure long since flattened. The tarps flapped uselessly, already eaten through by the oily drops. Inside the shelter it smelled like death and metal, and still the rain forced its way in, dripping from the ceiling in slow, deliberate beats. One of the scavengers, the same who had spoken of ghosts at the glass lake, whispered that the storm was alive, that it was the sky itself weeping poison. No one laughed, not this time. Hours passed, and the storm did not ease. We rationed water carefully, for even though we were surrounded by liquid it was undrinkable, unapproachable. Every drop carried sickness, every puddle a trap. Some of the civilians grew desperate, licking condensation from the inside of their masks, tongues swollen with thirst. It was then we learned the worst of it. The black rain did not just poison, it carried weight. The longer it fell, the thicker it became, until the air itself turned heavy with vapor, pulling at lungs with every breath. Masks began to clog, filters darkening, choking. Scarjaw ordered them swapped, but supplies were thin, and each replacement bought only a few hours. By nightfall, the rain was still coming down, harder than before. The ridge had become a slick riverbed, black streams running down both sides into the valley. The trucks sat lower now, their wheels half sunk in sludge despite the tarps, engines drowned in silence. We took shifts guarding them, though from what I could not say, Perhaps Scarjaw feared the sludge itself would rise and swallow them. Perhaps he feared something else, something that might come crawling out of the storm. Sleep was impossible. Every sound was rain, every breath a struggle through damp filters. When my turn at watch came, I stood at the edge of the ridge and stared out at the darkness. The rain fell so thick it seemed to erase the world, leaving only me, the sound, and the endless veil of black. That was when I saw them, shapes moving in the downpour. At first I thought they were tricks of my tired eyes, shadows bending in the curtain of rain. But then they grew clearer. Figures staggering across the valley, heads bent, arms loose at their sides. Not soldiers, not scavengers. No one could walk unprotected through this storm. Scarjaw appeared at my shoulder, silent as ever. He watched with me, lenses gleaming as the shapes drew closer. When I whispered my question, he only muttered one word, fallout. The figures moved slowly, dissolving as they walked, flesh peeling in strips that melted into the black sludge below. Still they moved, step after step, their bodies wasting but never falling. They did not look up, did not raise their heads, but something in the way they moved filled me with dread deeper than anything we had yet faced. Scarjaw raised his rifle but did not fire. What use was a bullet against something already undone? Instead he ordered us deeper into the shelter, away from the edge. We obeyed without question, the civilians whimpering as the sound of the rain grew louder, as though the storm itself pressed closer. We waited through the night, every hour longer than the last. The shapes never climbed the ridge, never broke through, but I could hear them, feet dragging through sludge, slow and steady, circling the base of the hill like wolves. By morning the rain began to thin, drops falling farther apart, though each one still stank of poison. The world below had changed. The valley was gone, replaced by a lake of black, steaming faintly where the storm had pooled. The trucks sat stranded on the far side, buried up to their doors. And still the shapes remained, scattered across the far shore, half sunk, arms still reaching, still moving though there was nothing left of them but husks. Scarjaw gave the order. We would not go down. We would not risk the valley again. We would move along the ridge instead, even if it cost us time and supplies. Better to starve on high ground than drown in poison. As we packed, I kept looking back at the figures. Some part of me swore they were closer than before, that they were following us with blind persistence. The storm had passed, but it had left behind its children. The belt was not done with us yet. We left the Black Lake behind, but it followed us in memory. The stink clung to our masks, the hiss of rain still alive in our ears. We moved along the ridge for days, steps slower than before, shoulders hunched as though the sky itself still threatened to open above us. Every cough made us fear the storm had gotten inside. It was on the fourth day that we saw the tower. At first it was nothing but a crooked shape through the haze, like another shard of dead metal jutting from the ash. But as we drew closer we saw it was whole. A radio mast rising from a cluster of buildings, squat and gray, their edges softened by decades of soot. The soldiers froze when they recognized it. An outpost, one of the perimeter stations left behind when the governments fell. They had been scattered across the belt like teeth, built to watch for incursions, to send warnings, to die first if the front shifted. This one stood silent, but intact. Scarjaw gave no debate. We would search it. Supplies might be inside, shelter too, and maybe answers. The outer fence sagged under its own weight, razor wire eaten by rust and rain. We slipped through gaps without effort, boots crunching over bones bleached gray as stone. Once soldiers had stood guard here, but they had long since joined the dust. Inside, the air was colder. The ash fell thinner, as though the mast itself bent the weather. We approached the main building, a bunker of concrete with windows blackened by soot. The door hung crooked, dented inward as if something had pounded at it for hours. Scarjaw gestured, and 2 soldiers went first, rifles raised. Their boots echoed hollow through the dark, and then the rest of us followed. The smell inside was stale metal mixed with mold. Not the sharp bite of death, but something worse, neglect, abandonment, the kind of silence that eats at the mind. We moved through rooms lined with bunks, overturned tables, scattered ration wrappers, signs of life, but all old, years old. Then we found the first mark, a message carved into the wall, deep and jagged as though the hand that wrote it had been trembling. Stay low, stay quiet, they listen. The scavengers whispered prayers, but Scarjaw only ran his glove along the letters and moved on. We searched deeper. In one room we found crates still sealed. Inside them old filters and canisters, warped but usable. The soldiers seized them, relief masked by discipline. We found food too, long expired but still edible, dried to powder inside foil packets. The civilians wept at the sight. It was when we reached the control room that we felt the weight of the place. Banks of dead radios lined the walls, their dials frozen, microphones tangled in coils of wire. Dust lay thick across everything, except for one seat. One chair still clean, as though someone had sat there only hours ago. On the table beside it rested a journal, its cover cracked, pages warped from damp. Scarjaw picked it up, flipping carefully through. The words inside scrawled quick and fevered. Day 17. The rain hasn't stopped. We've lost 2 men to cough, filters failing. Day 23. Voices outside the fence at night. Not ours, not theirs either. Day 30. They said the storm carried more than poison, that it carried memory, that the dead walk the belt not as they were, but as it remembers them. Day 41. If anyone reads this, know this place is not safe. The air here listens, the walls listen. We hear whispers when we sleep. They aren't ours, they aren't theirs. The writing ended there. Scarjaw closed the book and said nothing, but I saw his grip tighten on the leather cover, his jaw set harder beneath the mask. That night we made camp inside the outpost, barricading the doors with crates and broken furniture. The storm had taken our tents and our tarps, and the walls at least kept the ash away. But I did not sleep, none of us did. It began with faint scratches along the walls, as though nails raked across the concrete. Then whispers, so soft I thought it was the wind. But they grew clearer, voices layered over one another, speaking in tones I could not place, words half-formed, sentences broken. Some sounded like pleading, others like commands. One of the civilians pressed his hands over his ears and screamed that they were inside his head. He clawed at his mask until soldiers restrained him, holding him down as he convulsed. When they pulled his gloves away, his palms were raw with scratches, as though he had been digging into his own skull. The voices did not stop. Through the night they swirled, a constant undertone beneath every breath. Some swore they heard names, their own names whispered back at them, low and mocking. By dawn the air felt heavy, though no rain had fallen. The civilians begged to leave, to take their chances back on the ridge. But Scarjaw refused. We had supplies here, filters and food, things the belt would not give twice. He ordered another sweep of the buildings, convinced there was more. In the far wing we found the armory, its rack stripped bare save for one thing. A rifle still locked in place, stock blackened, barrel warped. On the wall above it someone had smeared words in ash. The last round is not enough. No one spoke after that. We stayed another night, though unease gnawed at every man and woman in the caravan. The whispers did not relent. If anything, they grew bolder, threading themselves through our dreams and our waking thoughts alike. Some claimed the voices called them outside, promising safety, promising warmth. In the small hours, I woke to the sound of the door creaking open. One of the scavengers had slipped free, stumbling out into the ash with arms spread as if to embrace the storm. He was gone before the soldiers could pull him back, swallowed by the gray without a trace. When the sun rose again, pale and weak through the haze, Scarjaw finally gave the order. We would move. Supplies or not, the outpost was not a place to linger. He burned the journal before we left, though I do not know if it was to erase the words or silence them. As we filed out, I glanced back once. The mast loomed against the horizon, proud but broken, its shadow stretching long over the belt, and I swore I heard the whispers again, carried faint on the wind, following us as we marched. The belt did not let go of its secrets. It only passed them along. We marched from the outpost in silence. No one spoke of the whispers, though they clung to us like ash in the lungs. Each face was hidden behind a mask, but I could feel the unease bleeding through every motion. Every glance cast too quickly over a shoulder, every hand resting too long on a weapon. The belt stretched wide before us, a barren plain streaked with glass and bone, its horizon blurred by drifting soot. The caravan moved slow, feet dragging, but Scarjaw's pace did not falter. He led as if the voices meant nothing, as if his body could resist what gnawed at the rest of us. By the third day, the civilians were breaking. They lagged behind, their breathing shallow even with filters. One woman collapsed, her knees buckling in the ash. The soldiers carried her for a time, but they too were growing thin, ration packs dwindling with every night. It was around the fire that the first argument cracked open. The scavenger with the burned face, the one who had survived every storm so far, spat out the words none of us dared say. "We cannot move like this. The weak will drag the strong down. If we split, some of us might make it. If we stay bound together, we'll all die here." Scarjaw answered in a growl. "We move as one. That is the only reason you are still alive. You break from the line. The belt will eat you, piece by piece." But the murmurs did not stop. The civilians whispered among themselves, fear blooming into defiance. Some soldiers, too, though they never said it aloud, only let it slip in the way their eyes lingered on their dwindling ammunition, their last filters. On the fifth night we found a half-collapsed bridge, steel ribs jetting from the ash like broken bones. Beneath it ran a ravine, dry now but once a river. The space beneath offered shelter from the drifting soot, and we lit small fires against the concrete. That was where the real fracture came. The scavenger spoke again, louder this time, his voice echoing off the dead stone. "Look at us, half of us already sick, stumbling like corpses. We can't haul them across the belt. We split the caravan. Let those who can move fast take the supplies, cut across the ridge to the western passage. The rest can linger, hope for rescue, hope for miracles." The civilians cried out at that, rage and despair tangled into one. One of them, a father clutching the last photo of his daughter, shouted until his mask fogged. "You'll abandon us the same way the outposts abandoned everyone. We've followed you through storms, through whispers, and now you would carve us away like rot." Scarjaw stood then. He did not shout. He never needed to. His voice was flat as stone when it carried over the firelight. "There is no rescue. There are no miracles. There is only the belt. It does not choose who lives. It only takes what is left. And if you split, it will take you faster." But even as he spoke, I saw the cracks deepen. Men shifting closer to the scavenger, their shoulders tightening, hands brushing weapons in nervous half-gestures. The air was thick with more than ash. It was choice, pressing down on us heavier than any storm. That night no one slept. The soldiers kept watch not only for what moved in the belt, but for each other. Every flicker of shadow across the firelight felt like the start of betrayal. At dawn, the scavenger acted. He rose before the fires were doused, pulling 3 men with him, each one carrying more than their share of packs. They slipped toward the ridge, hoping the gray would hide them. But Scarjaw was faster. His pistol barked once, the shot echoing across the silence. One man fell screaming, the pack spilling filters and food across the ash. The rest froze, hands raised, the belt itself holding its breath. Scarjaw's voice cut through them, harsh and final. "You split, you die, not by storm, not by whispers, by me." The scavenger spat in the dirt but dropped his pack. They limped back to the fires, stripped of supplies, stripped of dignity. But the seed had been planted. The divide was no longer words in the dark. It was blood spilled on the ash. We moved again, slower now, trust fraying with every step. The civilians no longer looked to Scarjaw as savior, only as jailer. The soldiers whispered among themselves about orders, about whether they still held weight in a world where no command structure remained. And the scavengers, they watched with hungry eyes, waiting for weakness, waiting for another chance. That night the storm returned, not black rain, not fire from the sky, but wind, tearing across the plain in shrieks that sounded too much like voices. We huddled beneath what shelter we could find, and in the howl of the gale I thought I heard it again. The same words carved into the wall of the outpost. They listen, they listen. I closed my eyes, but the wind carried more. Faint names, faint memories, voices of those we had lost, voices of those we would soon lose. When dawn came, the caravan rose in silence. No arguments now, no shouts, just eyes hollowed by the knowledge that tomorrow someone else would break, someone else would fall, and Scarjaw would not hesitate to make the belt's choice for it. The line had not split, but it had bent, and bent things do not hold forever. The ash began to thin. For days we had moved through veils of gray, never seeing more than a dozen paces ahead, but now the sky showed its face, and it was fire. The horizon burned, not with the sun but with something older and hungrier, an endless wall of red haze stretching from one end of the world to the other, a smear of light that pulsed like a wound. We stood at the ridge and stared at it, the last of us who could still stand, and not one of us spoke. Scarjaw broke the silence first, his voice low, almost reverent. The divide, the edge of the belt, beyond that is open land, fields that still grow, water that still runs. If we reach it, there may be life. but his words felt thin against what loomed ahead. The fire was no storm we had seen before, no rain or whispering wind. It moved slow, like a tide, a heat that shimmered in waves and twisted the very air. We felt it even on the ridge, baking through the filters, drying our mouths until the tongue stuck to the roof. The caravan staggered forward anyway, not because we believed the promise, but because to turn back was death all the same. The civilians clung to each other, masks blackened and cracked. The soldiers kept their weapons loose in their hands, though there was nothing left to shoot. And the scavengers followed with hollow eyes, driven only by the instinct of beasts who refused to lie down. The ground changed as we neared the light. The ash gave way to crusted black earth, brittle and sharp beneath our boots. Every step sent cracks spidering outward, tiny fractures glowing faintly from below, as if the earth itself smoldered. By nightfall the heat had grown unbearable. We found no shelter, only jagged stone rising like broken teeth. The fires we lit were useless against the glare of the horizon, which painted every shadow in blood. The air tasted of iron, heavy and sharp. It was then the first of us collapsed for good. The father with the photo, the one who had shouted against abandonment. He stumbled once, twice, then fell face first into the brittle crust. When we rolled him over, his mask was cracked and his eyes were burned white. Scarjaw did not pause. He ordered the line forward. We left the body for the belt. On the second day the whispers returned, not from the wind this time, but from the fire itself. As the haze rippled across the sky, we heard voices laced in its hum, soft, coaxing, promising. They spoke in tones too familiar, too intimate, names we had not heard since before the world ended. The civilians wept behind their masks. One soldier tore his filter away, screaming into the heat that he heard his daughter's voice. His skin blistered before he finished the scream. Scarjaw dragged us onward. He walked as if the fire did not touch him, as if the whispers could not reach him. But I saw his hands tremble once, saw the muscles in his jaw clench as though he too heard what he refused to admit. By the third day, only a handful of us remained moving. The scavengers had scattered into the haze, chasing the voices, their silhouettes lost in the glare. The civilians were gone, burned by the heat or swallowed by the cracks. The soldiers moved like husks, rifles slung loose and forgotten. And then the fire broke. The wall of haze split, a seam opening across the sky, and through it we saw the land beyond, green, real green. Fields stretching into distance, rivers cutting silver lines, a horizon that did not bleed. It looked like a memory, or a lie, but it was there. We stood at the threshold, the ground glowing at our feet, and Scarjaw turned to us. His mask was cracked, his skin blistered raw, but his eyes still burned steady. "This is the end of the belt. Past this line we live. If you falter now, you die here. Choose." His voice shook as he said it, and for the first time I understood. He had never been immune to the belt, never untouched. He had only carried its weight longer than the rest of us. One soldier tried to step forward, but the crust gave way beneath him. The earth split, glowing red, and he vanished in fire. The rest of us froze, staring into the gap that stretched between ash and green. Scarjaw moved first. He stepped into the light, boots landing on a narrow strip of solid stone that cut across the divide like a scar. His body swayed in the heat, but he did not stop. He reached the other side, turned, and raised one blistered hand. I followed. I do not remember how, only that my body moved while my mind screamed. The stone burned through my soles, the whispers clawed at my skull, but I crossed. And when my boots struck earth again, the air changed, cooler, cleaner, filled with scents I had forgotten: grass, water, life. Behind me, not all made it. Some fell into the cracks, their screams cut short. Some turned back into the haze, lured by voices that were not their own. When it was done, only a handful of us stood on the far side with Scarjaw. We looked back once. The belt seethed, fire closing the seam, swallowing the last of the stone. The horizon burned brighter than ever, sealing itself away. There would be no crossing again. Scarjaw dropped to his knees then, his strength finally broken. He did not rise. The belt had carried him this far, but it had also taken everything. He fell without a sound, his body folding into the grass as though it had been waiting for this place to let go. We buried him at the edge, where ash met earth, where no storm could reach. The wind carried green scents over his grave, but I could still taste iron in the back of my throat. We were through, but I could not shake the truth burned into me by the belt, that nothing waits beyond divides except more divides. that survival is not victory, it is only a reprieve. I still walk, through fields that grow, under skies not yet burned. But in the quiet, when the wind shifts, I hear it. Whispers rising from the horizon where the belt still burns. Whispers that remind me it is never gone. It is only waiting. And so I carry it with me. The memory of ash, of fire, of voices that are not dead but listening still. The belt is not behind us. The belt is within us. And one day it will rise again.